There'll be others, and I'm going to come back here and put it down here for you. Just put it down here. A widget, discussion area. Make sure you can all get in there. And there you have it, a state test. So let's do this. Let's come back here now on the state test and make that number 9 to make sure you get to do this. And I know some of you are skipping this, and it really kind of defeats the whole thing. But I'll just say discussion, and you come back here and mark off the box that I'm going to insert a box, hopefully in your notes. And you mark off that you've done that, or you make a note here, number 9, that you did the discussion on should we have a state test. Okay. So that's assessment of learning, and now assessment for learning. And essays, projects, proposed, resources for this. No, here it comes down to this. In the highlight, they also maintain records about how well lessons went for adaptations they made, and they will do the same at different next time. Recorded notes and evidence about student work also can be an important part of this. In addition, elements should include notes about growth over time. So in other words, it's your notes, it's your process to improve the learning. Okay. Purpose of helping students learn at higher levels. Assessment can help identify this. Do not think assessment is something only teachers do. Students can do it too. Right, talks about that. And then types of assessments. Here's the types. We're going to talk about a diagnostic test, norm reference test, criterion reference test, and a summative test. Now here's the thing with all these guys. It's critical that you become familiar with these terms, because it will become a common part of jargon, not only the rest of the time at a university, at your university studies, but beyond, even in the schools, that you have to have a working knowledge of these terms. So I want to get you closer to that. This will not do it as this is just a survey level course, but it'll get you closer to that. So let's look at these a little more in depth. First of all, a diagnostic measure, and I'm going to ask you to bring these in here. And I'm sorry I look back. This is number 10. Number 10 here is an understanding of these 1, 2, 3, 4. And so you'll do that, and I'll help you a little bit here. So first of all, here, this I highlighted here. One important check is determine whether the measure is designed to compare students across the state or nation, or whether it's designed to determine if students have developed the core knowledge and skills, and they're different. So one of the things that comes important to this is what type to use is what is it you want to use the information for? Is it to compare, or is it to improve, determine where they're at? There are different needs, different objectives of it. So diagnostic is what that name implies. You diagnose something. Whether the level of student is functioning compared to the level of others, feedback of those is. These types of assessments provide an array of questions and tasks for a student to perform in a specific area, such as reading, writing, and math. Here in the highlighted, in such assessments, the questions and tasks might be organized by difficulty. As a student performs each task successfully, he or she is given another, more difficult question. Okay, got it? So we're diagnosing something. We gave a question or a test item or something, and then it progressively gets a little more challenging to see what they know. We do this sometimes when they move into our district or at the beginning of the school year. You want to find out, where should I start teaching? So you give some type of a diagnostic assessment where it progressively gets a little bit harder. And of course, another place here in this paragraph is for special needs. This is exactly what we do when we assess for special education services. We give diagnostic assessments. Okay, that's one. The next one, norm reference. Norm reference assessments are used to demonstrate who is the best in some area. With norm reference assessment, individual performance is compared. This is the compare one. Diagnostic is you're determining where to start. This one you want to compare. And who do you want to compare it to? Another group of similar students. That's why it's important that you match grade and age. That's why that's all so specific when you do the state tests, is so you can compare that to a norm group. And norm mean is the group that are like you that I'm comparing you to. The group I compare you to is the norm group. When I say you, I mean you student, but you would do this with your students. Often these are referred as standardized tests. You knew that. Standardized tests are normed reference tests. They're for comparing. They're for comparing. Developing these tests are rigorous and expensive. To norm them is very rigorous and expensive. Not so much to write them, but to norm them. What's normal? Also, they are developed. They are carefully revised on a regular basis to ensure that there continue to be valid scores. These types of tests do not reveal all that the individual knows. It's just enough to compare. Standard, in some ways, norm reference measures are like a contest, expected that some students will excel and others will fail. So it's like 50%. Let me see just a second. Let me show you a little bit what that means. Anytime we give a norm reference test, we talk about a bell-shaped curve. In the middle would be, we would say 100 would be normal, average. That's not a grade, that's just a score. And from that we would say 50% should be below normal and 50% should be above. So there's never, if you have 100% over here or over here, there's something wrong with the test. And that's why it's important that they re-norm it, they revise it every so often. So if too many are on this side, you would make it a little bit harder. You would re-norm it that way. Or too many are below, so the average is below 100, then you would re-norm it that way. That's what a norm reference is. In a normal distribution, there should be 50%. There should be 50% on each side of normal. And it's believed this too. In a true bell-shaped curve, 35% would be one standard deviation here, 35 one standard deviation here. And of course up here we'd say gifted, down here we'd say special. But for this purpose, a norm reference, 50% will score below the 50th percentile. And this is the percentile here. This is 50 percentile on this side, 50 percentile on this side. In fact, when schools begin to score regularly above the percentile, the test is made more difficult. A related problem is that the nature of the test prevents the inclusion of questions on some of the core most important concepts. Too many students select the correct answer because their teachers focused on that, but not that they really know it. So that's a normed. Now, how about a criterion reference test? Instead of comparing a student's performance that a comparison group, criterion assessments compare students' performance with a specific type of accomplishments. For example, you would assess whether students can add two-digit numbers without regrouping. And to measure that skill, a student would simply do it. And if they can successfully do it, on 8 out of 10 questions, teacher would state some degree of confidence, child knows how to do it. Most classroom tests are criterion. Most classroom teacher-made tests, most classroom tests that come with the book or with the curriculum are criterion, meaning we don't compare you. We simply say a certain score on this says that you know it. Probably the most moves you back to the norm reference. Also, learning has to answer more questions than instead of scoring a test using a sort of A-F range. Here's another one that criterion that's always been is taking the driver's test. That's the criterion test I know you've all taken, because if you don't get a certain score, you don't pass. And if you don't pass, you don't get your license. So that's a criteria. The criteria is set. Here's the criteria. You know the criteria when you come in. And if you don't reach the criteria, you don't make it. That's a criterion reference test. And the fourth is a capstone or a summative assessment. And a capstone one is that you demonstrate at the end, something like at the completion of a course, you do a recital or graduation or something like that. Or what's the capstone experience of the program you're in? Well, it would be student teaching, that you would go out and demonstrate that you know something. And now a lot of our high schools are implementing capstone experiences at the end. All right. Let me ask you, so in capstone, you're going to do capstone here, but what I want you to do for each of this, and this will stretch you. This will stretch you. Each one of these, one drawback for each one of these. What would be one drawback for each of these things? For diagnostic measurements, what would be a drawback of that? Norm reference, capstone, criterion reference. Okay, so one drawback. You're going to tell what they are, and one drawback. And that is number 11, the drawback. How about performance measurements? Here's performance measurements. First is authentic, promotes student understanding in the real world. And that's a big new thing in the last 15 or 20 years. Parents and educators want assessments allow students to demonstrate a number of ways that they have met the standards in a real world or authentic settings. In other words, a performance. Show me. Show us what you learned. The best performance measures are designed to promote student understanding and learning engagement rather than simply having to recall the facts. The development of this is teaching in challenging times. Performance assessment can be used to demonstrate a specific proficiency. You're proficient in something. Example has been taught a specific method of using a piece of science equipment, such as a gram balance. A performance assessment would include having the student weigh several objects on the balance and show that they know how to run it. And the teacher would typically observe the student to see whether all the techniques are followed. An example of performance-based assessment outside the classroom is the road test for driving. That you took the test, the criterion test, successfully passed it. Now you go and drive. And you demonstrate in an authentic performance-based test that you can do it. Now, if that was true, I don't know. My 85-year-old father-in-law, I can't imagine how he can do this. I think he needs to go demonstrate this. Again, maybe that's what they should have to do each year after a certain age, is go do the performance-based or the authentic assessment of driving. But maybe need to do something here. Okay, so that's authentic or performance-based. And another authentic, let me flip you back over here. Authentic assessments are performance that are authentic. Another important characteristic: when the tasks are realistic in terms of being too close to possible. There are three major areas considering and developing authentic assessments for standards. First, a rich context needs to be designed, permits inquiry. Second, and finally third, and develop this benchmarks and context. And that's what I want you to do here. Number 12 is you will include these two here, benchmarks and context. And you will, there. Okay. These types of performance assessments here, 3, I've clipped that and have you bring that in. So that will be right here. That'll be number 13. 11.3 comes in with you. Let me see this one here. Too often teachers assess only one way but teach another. And for example, assessing by using paper and pencil tests or using single answer questions when instruction has been emphasized is inquiry is inappropriate. Same as the reverse. If you're assessing a student on a hands-on on inquiry mode, but you've only taught with lecture and paper pencil, that doesn't work either. So that is that. And I've also clipped this one, I think. Yes, 11.4 also will come in. And we'll put that right here. This is number 14. 11-4 figure comes in here. Okay. And I'm going to rely on you to read a number of those things so you're familiar with it. And then the rubric is a scoring guide. It's a way of describing different levels of accomplishments or degrees of being proficient. Rubrics are either analytic or holistic. And that's what you'll get here is for number rubrics here, number 15 is the analytic or holistic. And you need to bring those two in right there. Okay. And basing assessments in the work of a discipline, and I'm going to let you do that one also, and this will be number 16. Mark them well when you bring them in. Thanks. So, professional aspects of good assessments. Well, first, principles of high quality assessments, then accommodations, then fairness, reliability, and validity. So first of all, here are these principles. High quality base assessments on learning standards, involve local educators in designing and scoring them, represent performance by understanding authentically embed assessments in curriculum instruction, provide multiple forms of evidence about student learning, meaning not just a test, and then evaluate standards without unnecessary standardization of them. So that is those principles. And right here they are again. Then accommodations is the issue of assessment become even more glaring for students who are English language learners and those with special needs. And that's more common, I guess, especially to me, is those with special needs. State and national assessments usually allow appropriate accommodations for use of groups as outlined. The purpose of an accommodation is to allow these students to access the test content without changing the accuracy of the test so that results are comparable to students who do not need the accommodation. Determining the accommodation depends on a number of factors, including their disability, age, nature of assessment, and that's all right here. And the skill and the subject being taught. Often simply changing the way in which a learning is assessed can provide this. So here's what you're going to do with accommodations. You're going to make this distinguishment. Accommodation, this will be number 17. Number 17 is you will note this. What is the difference between accommodation and modification? And here it is. This is what you're going to put in here for number 17. Accommodation is you can change access to the curriculum or the assessment. You can change the way they access it. They maybe use technology. They maybe use an aid. Any of those things. It'll change the way. An accommodation is you change the way they access assessments or curriculums or school. Modification is you change the rigor. You change how hard it is for them, not their access. That's what you put in there. And then there is this thing of fairness. Some of the attractions of state tests are that they are standardized, perceived to be objective and inexpensive in comparison to performance. Okay, that'll give you one of your critiques of performance assessments is they're expensive to do. They take time. One of the problems they ignore they lived experiences of many test takers, and that's always the criticism of this big testing movement is it just really ignores life experiences, what kids know that aren't on the tests, resulting in bias that gives students from one group an advantage over another. Analysis of test items show that many of them are biased against students from low-income families. We've heard this before. That's kind of a mantra here. Being assessments on a set of standards provides appropriate standardization. Unlike standardized tests, they can take into account variations of achievement. So one of the things that's been said is sometimes these tests aren't determining what's taught, it's determining who are the low-income kids. And your lifelong challenge will be is how to change that. And I said to you before, if it was money, it would have been corrected years ago. There's something else we're missing there. And so, often biased to low income, okay? Tests ignore lived experiences. And first, this validity is whether an item measures the intended objective. Is it measuring what was taught, what it was supposed to, and is it consistent information about learning? That's what those two are. And then this one here is a little trickier, and you get to bring some in here. Before leaving the assessment topic, you'd like the interest in how new approaches to assess teacher candidates, which are you. There are some interesting, promising directions in this area as well. In this section, you review two approaches. First, Performance for California Teachers Act, and I'll let you bring some information about that in. And then the one that more for us here is we do the teacher work sample, and they're very similar, but you describe here what a teacher work sample is. Make a nice description so that you know, because in my understanding, everybody in South Dakota, at least, all the teacher ed programs, you have to do a work sample while you're student teaching. And that is where you document learning. You're going to document that you've taught, the kids learned from you. And so you get that there. And here's a good thing on that. So this will be number 18. 1, 2, what those are. Before we go further, I want to back up on one thing. Number 19 is 11.7. I've clipped this one about modifications, testing accommodations for English language learners and learners with disabilities. I want you to have that in your notes also. So let's make that number 19, 11-7 right here. Now let's jump into this thing of the last one, accountability. And let me just take you here on accountability of the different models and stuff like that. And I'm going to ask you to help here with things like high stakes testing and cheating and teaching to the test, those kinds of things. So first of all, what is data is value added to different models here from the textbook. Let me flip up here a couple pages for you. So here's accountability. In the news stories beginning of the chapter, policymakers in many areas of the country are starting to hold teachers directly accountable for student learning as never before. All that we have just introduced is the importance of assessments. But one of the things that we can debate is, is that right? What level of accountability should you have and I have? What accountability should we have for student learning? And I'm going to make that another discussion question here. And so I'm going to come back over here and come back to our page here. And I'm going to add that right here. Let's see, I'm going to cancel this and just talk about accountability. Should we have as teachers? Typos. What level of accountability should we have as teachers? Should we be responsible not for teaching but for learning? And when I say that, in comparison to who else should be accountable, what responsibility does the student have, the learner? What responsibility do parents have? Now, before you explode on this, as some of you want to, just realize that not every child comes from a family like yours where education and learning and complying at school is important. So if you're going to dump this on parents, what about the ones that don't have supportive, educated parents? And if you're going to dump this on the students, what about the ones that don't have the skills to keep up? And I know there's an exception to every rule, so I want you to consider all that when you're responding to this, but everybody needs to respond to this. All right, and so we are going to come back here, and this will be our number 20. And that is to discuss accountability. Discuss accountability. Okay, so let's get at it here. Accountability, because you're going to be held. Sources and uses of data and accountability. Well, first of all, they couldn't decide on these different models because No Child Left Behind said that you got 2 years to have everybody make annual yearly progress, AYP. Important new approaches to analyzing this. First is the growth model. Because there was no comparing from one year to the other, one of the models is let's do that, this growth model. So what the growth model said, compare growth, account for characteristics such as poverty. No, I'm sorry, this growth one is here. Relies on multiple measures of performance. Year-to-year test scores of those attend the school and time period. Accountability question comes like this. Did those students who were in school for a year, again, more than less than similar students in other schools? Okay, so another way to ask this is the growth model is by how much on average did math scores and students attending this school improve over the last year? So we have that here. Then the value added model says growth over a period of time. And so those are here. This is the value added model. And then there's this next one is the cut score, multiple measures. And I'm going to ask you to talk about that. This will be number 21. Is cut scores and model, and you explain that, and that is simply by assigning that like a summative thing. It's a gatekeeper thing. Do you pass or don't you do? Here's the score that your student has to get to pass. Particular standardized test selected, policy boards, state and boards, and legislator side on the cut score. Then the fate of the test taker depends on whether they score above or below that. Kind of becomes criteria. A significantly more responsible way, so these authors are saying, is multiple measures. Any gatekeeping type of decision should be based on several measures and different types of measures, not a single test. Policymakers also at all levels should require multiple measures. This would also be self-imposed requirements by you as a teacher. See, one of the things that happened here too, that for a long time we gave you that credibility, said that if you said that they learned and they met minimum requirements, then they got this little piece of paper that walked out the door that said certificate, graduation. And what happened is we started to find more and more people walking out the door with that piece of paper that were not prepared, that didn't have basic skills. And that's when the government said, oh my gosh, we've got to get in there. We've got to get this straightened out. And it really fell on your shoulders as teachers. And we then decided that you did not have that credibility to make that decision. And I'm not sure how we all got there, but that's what it comes down to. We used to let you make that determination, and now you don't get to. So now one of the things that they're proposing here is that you have multiple measures. And we've talked about a whole different bunch of ways, but still there would have to be some gatekeeper then that brought those all together and made that determination. And I'm sure that would be a bureaucracy board, and it's not as simple as it sounds. But multiple measures, and that's what you're talking about here. Then what about a national curriculum? Here are two multi-state testing consortiums. And what it means is that here's the first national test. In this chapter was standardized tests, next addressing assessments. Now, what about this? Well, let me just read this to you. In 2011, the federal government along with foundations such as the Gates, awarded $360 million to two consortia, two outfits, to develop new annual state tests for grades 3 through 8 and grade 11. Tests are to measure students' progress on a path towards college and career readiness. Okay, get that. College and career, not work. Remember, we said only half the kids will go to college, but we're going to focus on them. The tests are to have common scaling and cut points so that it's possible to do cross-state comparisons, and that's the whole thing. So we can compare. These states can be administered using computers, and both will include assessments of higher order thinking and problem solving. And of course, that's a little bit mushy of what is higher order thinking and problem solving. But nonetheless, the reason it's got to be on the computer also is so now we can disseminate those results. We can get those to the feds. And I guarantee you this is coming to a school near you where we will adopt these standardized tests, and our information will also go out. Let me just read the rest of this to you. States have a choice of joining both these as an observer or joining both with decision-making authority. Here's where they're at. More Western and New England states have joined. This Smarter Balance one, and the others are interesting. For example, Smarter Balance is aiming computer adaptive test. In this approach, the computer chooses next item based on the response to the last student. But I'm telling you, all states are going to fall into this in the near future. And you're going to adopt one of these, and then they'll phase out one of those, and we'll all be taking the same test. Are we moving towards a national curriculum? This is what I want you to address right here. Number 22. You read this. Are we moving towards that? And then you come back and respond. How about technology? Tracking. Again, the thing with technology is we cannot transfer and disseminate this information without the technology. And it gives you a bunch here. Let me just flip ahead here, but that that's coming right here, these different companies. Then these international comparisons, trends in international math, international student assessments, international reading. I'm going to ask you to make one thing about each of these. This will be number 23. 1, 2, and 3. And then testing challenges. And this is your last one. This is number 24. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And these are the ones that really come down to the ground again with you. Pressure to cheat, teaches and tests. It's all runs across here. High stakes testing, I say we've kind of beat that to death, but some of these other ones, not so much here, the criteria for it, but pressure to cheat, high stakes conditions, teachers and principals invest concerted effort in helping their students on these tests. And nearly every school and classroom teachers and regular ed this. These preparations can be practical and practicing. We've got some well documented. We've got people in prison now for this. That we found that principals and teachers alike. Cheating ranges from telling students how to answer specific questions, principals and school administrators actually changing students' responses. Happened several years ago in Atlanta, Georgia. Some instances, schools have encouraged some students, such as those with learning disabilities, to stay home on the day of testing and not be tested. And so you get to bring that into that pressure. And again, how can it not be? How you can imagine what's at stake. That'll be the next big wave in our system is, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do with these people that are cheating? And then we'll have that scramble. And next thing you know, we'll have to have somebody from the federal government come to your school and observe during the time to make sure there's no cheating. And he'll have to administer them with the computers, or maybe the feds will buy a couple million computers, and he'll come to your school, and you have to use their computers to take the tests and the stuff. That would be another reason for them to want one national curriculum and one national test, because then they have complete control of it. Ha! And then teaching to the test, that's a long booted one around. You read that and respond to that on the thing. And then I'm going to put this up, number 25. Does prepping for high-stakes tests interfere with teaching? So this will be number 25. Who's right? discuss. And again, please do this. I'm going to start taking off of that. Go do that at the end. Who's right? And you can't do it till you've read this. It's a little bit longer this time, but it's very good. Then one size fits all. You'll read about increased teacher burdens, of course, with that. And then this is a big one in this text, equity with accountability. And of course, that again, it shows you here in this graph. But ultimately, the biggest thing we can diagnose is who the poor kids are, because they tend to always score the least on this. And one of the things is there's maybe if we put enough highly qualified teachers in, we can close that gap. So there you have it, chapter 11 on testing.